Hello and welcome to another awesome episode of How to Paint. Today we're looking at the Bad Batch. This was requested by you guys and thank you for voting. These guys were really fun to paint. So let's get into it. So here they are, Clone Force 99, also known as the Bad Batch. Each one of these models comes with an alternative head, so you can do a helmet or the face. And I do love their helmet designs. They don't often wear their helmets in the show, but I wanted to at least incorporate all of the helmets on the bases and then do a few faces as well. So as I'm building these for Hunter and Wrecker, I'm going to do their normal faces, but then I've got the helmet here and I'm going to glue that to the base. I'm also cleaning up these models if there's any flash or mold lines. And with Omega and the debris, I'm putting these on a separate temporary base for now, because it's going to be easier to paint. I'm doing my normal thing of priming in black, and I'm doing this all over, and then a highlight prime of white from just above here, normally about 45 degrees. This helps make a roadmap of all the details and the highlights. And for the main armor color, we're starting off with a mixture of Runic Grey and Gravelord Grey. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing a roughly 2 to 3 mix of each. And then I'm just thinning that down just a little bit with some of the Speedpaint medium. And you can see it makes like a really nice light grey wash almost for the miniature. And what's nice about this is I can actually do 2 or 3 coats and build up to that dark grey that you see the armor in. But being able to just build up rather than having to paint in highlights is where I want this armor to be. So you can see this is the second coat going on and it's just darkening it just a little bit more to where I think that neutral grey color is. And so I'm doing 2 coats on every member of the Bad Batch apart from Tech, who has slightly lighter armor. So he's just getting the 1 coat here. And as you can see, the other 4 members of the Bad Batch are in that nice dark grey, and Tech is in a lighter grey. So to even things out on that contrast paint, I'm using Mechanicus Standard Grey. And this is almost that same color, but what I'm doing is I'm just evening out some of those splotchy areas where some of that contrast paint kind of pulled where I didn't want it to, especially on the highlighted areas. So right now I'm not too worried about markings and armor colors and things. I'm just making sure that there's an overall gradient from light to shadow all over the model. And then here I'm using some coal black, and I'm applying this to any of the areas of cloth or under armor that they're wearing. So for example, the elbows and the knees. I'm starting to get a little bit more precise, but if I make a mistake, I can just correct it with that standard grey. And then I'm introducing some bold titanium white, and I'm mixing this into kind of an ashy grey colour, and I'm starting to add just a few key highlights on the armour. Not too many, I don't want it to appear too shiny, and I don't want to build up to a main white, I just want to get just a couple glints here and there. And I'm using some reference, and it looks like some of the areas of the armour are just slightly darker than the others. So I'm using Grim Black, and I've watered this down with some Speedpaint medium again, and I'm just applying this to some of the patches that have a different pattern. So for example, Crosshair's inner thighs have like a darker paint on them than the outside. I'm also using this for some of the details on the chest and around the waist as well. And then lastly, I'm doing a damage pass over the whole model. So this is a fairly bright grey, and I'm just doing some scratches and dents and things on some of the edges of the armor. In the show, they've got quite a stylish kind of texture on them, And I'm trying to replicate that here. And now for some more of those details, I'm using Mephiston Red. And this may take a couple coats because it does dry darker, so I do want it to pop against this grey. You could apply this a little bit scratchier or add a texture on top with some of that grey, but I wanted these guys to have a fairly clean look. And what I'm doing is I'm getting all of the models up to that same level right now. So I'm just going around and applying this red to all of the markings. Now I'm switching over to a dark wood speed paint, and I'm going to be using this for the leather on Crosshair, so his holster, his belt, and I'm just doing one coat on this. And then for all of the weapons, I'm just doing a very simple coat of Grim Black. And then I'm just adding a couple highlights on his belt with some white. Echo has a couple markings on his helmet with some white, and luckily these are raised in the sculpt, so I'm just letting the edge of the brush just catch these. And then just getting the skull insignia on his chest as well. I'm going to be attempting Rekka's helmet pattern here, and this is just a white that I'm applying, and I'm just very sketchily drawing some of those markings. I'm kind of simplifying them a little bit as well, but I'm getting those teeth in there, and then I'll take a black and just outline the teeth and tidy them up a little bit. And then using that Mephiston Red just to catch that 99 symbol on his helmet as well. Hunter's also getting the same treatment. Again, I'm just taking my time, just loosely sketching in a skull shape. And at this distance and this scale, you don't have to be 100% accurate. To finish out some of these armor details, I'm going to be dry brushing some very light grey on Echo's prosthetic arm here. And then lastly, just a couple quick highlights on Crosshair's sniper rifle. Okay, next we're going to be working on the faces. So to start off with, I'm using Bugman's Glow. And I chose two of my guys to not have helmets on, which is Hunter and Rekka. So for Hunter's face, I'm just starting off with just an all-over Bugman's Glow. I'm not too worried about even covering the eyes. And then I'm going to start highlighting with Basic Flesh. And so what I'm looking to do is just hit some of these main areas, basically most of the face. I'm going to be leaving areas around the lips and some of the creases around the cheeks and the jawline in that original Bugman's Glow, but most of this face is going to be Basic Flesh here. And before I get too far along, I'm going to start doing the eyes. So this is a fairly light grey, and then a black, and it's going to look really goofy, and so I'm just going back and forth, adjusting the eyes to how I like them. And then I'll take that original flesh tone, that Basic Flesh, and just tidy up around the eyes. And then for my highlights today, I'm going to be using Thar Brown. And I've mixed this in with the Basic Flesh to get kind of a mid-tone between the two. And I'm just applying this to the main areas of the cheek, most of the nose, the chin, just some of these more upturned areas. And then once I'm happy with that, I'll apply just a pure Thar brown as the brightest highlight. And now I'm going to get a little bit wacky. I'm going to mix in some dark blue, just a very, very small amount, in with that basic flesh color. And this makes kind of a cool, stubbly, dark skin color for your kind of 5 o'clock shadow. And so I'm applying this to the bottom of the chin and just around where his beard would have been shaven. Hunter has a skull tattoo that matches the marking on his helmet. So for this, I'm going to be using Crusted Saw, and I mixed a little bit of black in with it to make it look more like tattoo ink, and then I'm just very, very loosely gesturing towards the skull. It was very difficult to get in there with the arm in place, so I'm just kind of giving the impression that there's a tattoo there. And then for his hair, I'm using that original dark wood and just applying this just straight onto the hair. For his bandana, it's just that normal Mephiston red. And I'm just being extra careful how I apply this. If you do struggle with details like this, a couple tips. Make sure both your hands are planted on the table or your elbows. And then you can always build up in stages. So if you wanted to paint the red first, do that and then build onto the face. Lastly, I'm just adding a white dot for the skull on his bandana. And then a couple of Thar brown highlights at the very end for his hair. I decided to zoom in just a little bit more for this one, just to show you the process again. So this is a very quick basic flesh highlight. And then mixing in a light grey for the eyeballs here. I actually got pretty lucky with this pupil placement, but if you struggle with it, you can also do a line and then tidy it up with those original flesh colors. And then here is that blue added to that flesh. And then those Thar brown highlights. And just building up in the tones and going smaller and smaller until I'm happy with those highlights. Lastly, I'm using an ash grey for his teeth and just very carefully just catching the inside of his mouth here. And this is the dark wood contrast paint. And I'm just very carefully getting some eyebrows in. Just letting the edge of my brush get a little bit of paint on the top of his brow here. And unfortunately my camera lost focus, but this is the original Bugman's glow, and he's got a scar on the left side of his face. So those are the main 4 members done that are very similar. Now we're working on 2 of the characters that are a little bit different in color scheme. So with the Mega, I'm starting off the same way, Bugman's Glow base coat for the flesh. And then instead of a basic flesh highlight, I'm actually using pink flesh. I'm introducing just a little bit more red to her cheeks. The method is still the same, I'm just applying these highlights to most of the face, and then I'll build up in tone until I get to my brightest highlight. And I am still using that Thar brown to mix in. I also made sure to get the eyes before I got too far into the highlighting phase as well. For her hair, I'm going to be using Hardened leather. And I'm just applying this straight from the bottle, just onto the hair, just letting it do its thing. And then I'm building up in highlights, starting with Zandri dust. And I'm making sure that the innermost parts of the hair are remaining in that hardened leather color. And I'm just highlighting it along the top of the sculpt with that Zandri dust. My next highlight is going to be Morghast bone. And I'm just getting this hair to the point where I'm kind of happy with the color. And then I'm introducing just a little bit of white for the brightest highlights on the hair. For the necklace thing on her head, I'm using a light blue. And then this is the dark wood speed paint for her trousers here. Followed by grim black for the boots. For the tunic, I'm going to be using Cloudburst blue, and I'm applying this to the sleeves. I'm making sure to leave the areas around the shoulders because these will be in an orange in a minute. And for those details, I'm using Wild Rider Red, and just very carefully getting the top of the shoulders and the swatch on her cuffs as well. For the rest of the tunic, I'm going to be using Deck Tan. And this is just a very simple application, and it's getting a little fiddly in here because it's getting harder to get some of this paint applied. So I'm just doing my best here. And then after that, I kind of felt that it was missing something. So I decided to apply some Nuln Oil, and I watered this down so it wasn't as strong, but it really did help just define those shadows a little bit more and just not make her look as flat. I was taking care just to apply this to the outfit as well, not the face. With the bow, I'm doing a base coat of Zandri dust. And then I'm actually applying that hardened leather speed paint just over the top here. And it's acting much more like a wash in this situation. And then while that's drying, I'm just adding a few highlights to the rest of the body. So this is a light blue that I've mixed with some of that white and dark blue. And then I'm prepping the bowstring with a white as well. I'm just adding some very quick and easy highlights to the bow, and this was just with some of the browns and tans I had on the palette. For the bowstring, I'm going to be using Fluorescent Red, and I'm just doing one coat on here, and it does actually come out quite pink in that first coat, which is great, because then I can take a damp brush and just wipe away some of that fluorescent paint, and it makes this lovely pink gradient. Okay, lastly we have Tech. So I'm starting off, he's actually got a lot more fabric than most of the other members of the Bad Batch. So this is a grim black for this fabric. And because his armor is one stage higher in tone than the other members, I'm starting off his armor with an ash grey. On the previous members, this was one of my highest highlights, so this is just that applied to most of these armor panels. I'm adding these red markings as I did with the other members. He actually did take me the longest because he's got a lot going on. So for the leather, I'm using Mournfang brown, and I'm just applying this to most of these straps here. and I'm just making sure that it's nice and saturated in color, so this might take 2 coats. To give the armor some depth, I'm going to be using Agrax Earthshade, and I'm just applying this to the leather parts. This helps warm up the leather a little bit and also add some shadows. He's still got a few more details to go, so I'm switching over to just a straight coal black here and just applying this to the antenna on the helmet. I'm prepping the lenses on his mask, so I'm doing this with a pure white first. And this is an airbrush yellow, but you can also use a fluorescent yellow if you have one. So this is a very nice light coat here. And then I just wanted to introduce a little bit of warmth to that, so this is Iyanden yellow. This being a contrast paint is also quite watery as well, so I'm just letting it fall into the edges. And then lastly, tidying up the edges with that Mechanicus standard grey. I'm going around adding damage to all of the areas of the armor, and because the armor is already quite a light grey, this is almost pure white. And then for some of those darker panels, I'm using that ash grey that I'd mixed together for the base of the armor. Lastly, I'm adding Skrag brown, and this is my scratches and dents for the leather. So for the bases, I'm going to be using my usual Shatterpoint recipe. So any of the metal is going to be a dark grey. And for any of the items and computers and things that they're interacting with, this is going to be a Runic grey speed paint. If they're on a dusty base, this is Skrag brown as a base color. And then what I do is I start dry brushing some highlights onto the metallic work. This is just a kind of light grey, followed by a dry brushing of white in some areas to make some key highlights. This is a kind of deck tan, Zandri dust tan color that I'm dry brushing onto the dirt. And then what I like to do is I like to break up a lot of this grey with some blue. This is a very, very watered down blue, and then just some, just a damp brush just to feather the edges here. For the debris that Crosshair is behind, I'm going to try and match the terrain that I did. And so this is a Zandri dust base coat. And then I applied a quick Agrax wash over the whole thing. And then I used Grim Black for the metallic details and a pigment powder for some of the dustier areas. I'm just gluing on Omega. And lastly, I'm going to be using Tesseract Glow for some of the computer screens, the buttons, that kind of thing. I've still got some fluorescent paints left over from the rest of the paint, so I'm just applying these sporadically on the buttons and switches. And then the only thing left to do is to paint the rims black. And there we go, the Bad Batch, ready for the table. These guys look awesome. Thank you so much for suggesting them. I've been meaning to paint them for a while. They sat in a stack, and this was just a really good excuse to do that. If you're new to the channel and you like these painting tutorials, please consider subscribing. Also, dropping a like and a comment helps out the video, and I love to hear what you guys think as well. Thank you once again to everybody that voted for the Bad Batch to be the next one to do. That really helped me out because I was kind of stuck as to what to paint. And I'll probably do something similar in the future as well. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.